Welcome back to HR Coffee Time. I'm so excited to have you listening or watching today because I have got the most amazing guest for you. Her name is Victoria Pounder and she is a Chief People Officer. And there are many reasons I'm excited that she's joining us on the show today, but one is that I know Victoria. So Victoria and I have worked together. She had some coaching. So I have seen firsthand just how inspirational she is. And one of the many reasons I invited her on the show is because if you listened to the very first episode in this series, where we got to hear from David D'Souza, who's Director of Profession at the CIPD, he talked about the fact that the Chief People Officer role is on the rise. In the last year, it went up by 6%. Now, what that means is that lots of organisations do not have a Chief People Officer role in them, but they may very well benefit from having one. So that was the case for Victoria. She was an HR director. There wasn't a Chief People Officer role at her organisation. Not only did she make the case that the organisation would benefit from having that role, she then convinced the board that she was the right person to fill it. So I just know you are going to find her so inspiring, and it's going to be so useful for any of you who are in that position where you're thinking, I feel like we should have a Chief People Officer role here, but I'm not sure how to go about making it a reality. Or if you want to make a case for showing your organisation you're the right person for that role, then hopefully this episode is going to help. And I know that Victoria is going to be absolutely cringing when I'm saying all of these wonderful things about her, because you're about to find out just how down to earth and wonderful she is. So let's go ahead and meet her now. Victoria, welcome to the show. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Hi, Faith. Thank you so much for having me. What an intro. I am cringing. I've been sitting here absolutely cringing whilst you've been saying all of that. But I feel very honoured to have been asked to join you on the podcast, or is it podcast now? Which is it?
Oh, yeah. It's funny, isn't it? I don't actually, I still call it a podcast, but I know it is a bit confusing because it is available on YouTube as well now, which I'm still getting the hang of and getting used to having to watch myself back on screen. So yeah, for anyone listening or watching, it's great to have you here, whether you're listening to the audio on a podcast app or you're watching us on YouTube. I'm going to dive straight into the very first question, which is, how did you get your first Chief People Officer role?
So I've been with my business for around 14 years now. And when I first joined, we were around 370 people and our HR team was around 4 people. And we were mostly just focused on sort of admin and transactional type work. And now we're around 1,200 people, and the people function as a result has had to evolve dramatically in that time. So I was the first head of HR, then the first HRD, and now the first Chief People Officer. So in one sense, it's been a natural evolution as the business has grown, but it wasn't really just a title change. I actually only stepped into that role officially on the 1st of May this year, and I had to put forward a full business case to show why the firm needed a CPO at that stage in our growth, and then go through sort of a panel process to demonstrate why I was the right person to take it on. So we're a professional services business, so our product is our people. So elevating the people agenda to the exec level is a strategic step for the business as a whole, and our success depends on our ability to attract, develop and retain brilliant people. And so having a CPO role in the business reflects that priority, I think.
It's great to hear how the organisation's grown and your role has really grown with it, and just how you were able to emphasise how important the people side of the business is and that everyone listened to you about that. As you have worked your way through all of those different roles, it's going to be great to hear your answer to this next question, which is for you, what has been the biggest difference between being an HR director and being a Chief People Officer? And I should say, actually, for everyone listening, so we are recording this interview in July, and Victoria just mentioned that she got the promotion in May. So she's super new to the role, but I think that makes it even more interesting to hear her take on it, because it's all going to be so fresh, all of these discoveries. And I know that once you've been in a role for a while, it can be easy to forget how it was to begin with. So bearing in mind, we know that you're really new to the role. For you, what has the biggest difference been?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is still really early days for me in that CPO role. And to be honest, actually, Faye, so much has shifted externally over the past few years that it's really hard to separate what's changed because of the role versus what's changed in the world around us. But what I can say is that I think the remit of the people function has expanded enormously, particularly since the pandemic, actually, and the expectations on people leaders are now much broader and more complex than they've ever been. So when I was putting my business case together for promotion, I was looking at what we actually covered within the people function, and I counted that we cover over around 25 distinct areas within the team. So you've got your compliance, policy, risk, engagement, culture, ESG, reward, performance, wellbeing, etc., etc. So people turn to us for answers across that whole spectrum. And as CPO, you're not just running a function, you're sort of leading the thinking across all of those areas and influencing how they connect to business performance. So I think the stakes feel a lot higher as a CPO. So you're expected to be a strategic partner, culture steward, risk mitigator, and like a voice for all of your people all at the same time. So it's an incredibly broad remit, and it requires you to constantly zoom in and out between detail and direction, I would say.
Well, I can't wait to hear a little bit later when we move on to some of the other questions as to how you're managing that, because I think hearing you describe it like that makes me fully appreciate how daunting the role can really be for people to step into. And perhaps also how much other functions don't necessarily appreciate
Mm,
how much responsibility there is when you are a chief people officer or you are
agreed.
leading an HR function. So now that you've started your first CPO role, how has it been different to what you'd expected?
Well, we're actually just in the middle of reviewing our wider organisational design. So I think probably my answer to this question might well evolve quite a bit over the next year. But already one thing that's I think is really clear is that while I expected it, of course, to be strategic, I've realised just how essential influence is to the job. So it's not just about being in the room for those big conversations. It's about knowing how to use your voice effectively when you're there having those conversations. And a lot of the work is behind the scenes. So you're aligning senior leaders, you're navigating organizational dynamics, trying to shift mindsets. And it's often that invisible sort of work, that incredibly important work that we do. And I found that influencing culture and direction takes just as much time, if not more actually, than actually setting the strategy itself.
Oh, that's fascinating to hear. And I facilitated a panel discussion yesterday, actually, which was called Getting the Board on Board, which was run by Evolving HR, which is a directory for services for HR professionals.
Mhm.
I will pop a link in the show notes to it because it's going to be available for anyone to watch. You don't have to have turned up live. And so it was all about talking about how do you get board level buy-in. And that was a theme that came out really strongly. All the recommendations from everyone on the panel was around influence. And it's not just about being in a meeting there and then or being in a board meeting when you convince people. It's all the stuff that's going on behind the scenes as well. So it's brilliant to hear you actually talking about that and saying that, yes, that is a reality. It would be fantastic if you're able to just really help paint a clear picture for people as to how do you go about that? Because when you hear the word influence, that can feel like quite a, I don't know if vague term is the right word. It's something hard to get your head around as to what that actually looks like. So, are there some things that you're doing that help you have that influence?
Well, I would say I think the biggest help for me is the fact that I've been with the business for so long. And so I know a lot of the stakeholders very well. And I've worked my way through the business from a pretty junior level up to the CPO level that I am now. And a lot of those people have been with me for that whole time. So I think influence really is around having the trust of the people that you're working with, and you build that trust up through the relationships that you have with people.
As far as building that trust is concerned, is there anything you've been doing in particular or you've been proactively thinking about to go about building that trust? Or is it just something that's naturally happened throughout your time at being at the organisation?
Certainly, having that time with people is is key to building trust, but I think it's getting to just know people on a better level and understanding who they are and how they work. And, we're all very, very different. There's lots of different characters in any business, and getting to understand them on a bit of a deeper level so that you know how best to communicate with them, what their key interests are, what the challenges are with them. I think, just really understanding their day to day is key to building that level of trust, and then obviously then helps you with the influencing side of things as well.
I think that's such an important message for us all, because especially, I'm not saying this at all because you haven't said there are any tricky characters at your work whatsoever. But I know for many of us, at some point or another, we may have come up against someone who feels potentially a little bit tricky. And I think human nature, your automatic response can be to like back right off or stay out of their way or avoid them. And this is something I've really noticed that can make a huge difference once you are getting to these senior leadership levels, is not doing that and leaning into the discomfort and actually still making the effort to get to know people. But I don't want to put you on the spot, Victoria, or imply at all that you've had anyone like that at your work, because I know that everyone you work with is lovely.
So everybody, of course, is lovely at our business, Faye. But what I would say is what's incredibly helpful is just getting to try and put yourself into other people's shoes and understand, sort of look at the world through their eyes and understand why they're thinking the way that they're thinking. And I think that can help incredibly to build those relationships with people. So I guess the empathy side of things.
Yeah, and it makes me think, kind of reflecting back on some of the other interviews with chief people officers who have kindly come on the show, they've also talked about developing that understanding of the other functions within the organization, really developing business acumen. And I think it's from doing that you can really put yourself in the other person's shoes, isn't it? Rather than trying to imagine how they're feeling. If you know what the challenges really are in their team or in their division, I think that can be really helpful. What do you think? Or am I going down the wrong path with it?
I completely agree with you. So it's about meeting with them regularly, talking to them about what the challenges are, what keeps them awake at night, all of the usual things that you hear people talking about when you're advising businesses on how to do things. The same, you take the same approach, I think, when you're talking to them about the people function. You need to understand all of that to be able to advise in the people related arena.
Fantastic. Oh, gosh, I feel like I could keep asking you about this for ages, but I better move us along to our next question. And actually, some of what you've just been talking about may shine through here as well, which is, which skills, habits, or practices have most helped you succeed as a chief people officer?
Well, again, bear in mind again that it's really early days for me in the chief people officer role, but I can definitely share some of those habits and principles that I think have helped me throughout my career and that I think are like setting me up well now for success. So first, I've always advocated for people over process. So fairness, transparency, doing the right thing, even when it's not the easy or popular choice. They've always been like my guiding principles in HR. I've learned over time to challenge the status quo, but I do try to do it constructively and with empathy, as I was speaking about before. Relationship building, as I mentioned, has also been key. So both with the senior stakeholders across the whole business, but also within my own people team. As we say, you can't drive meaningful change without that trust there. So that's really important. A huge factor, self-development. So I spend a lot of time reading, learning, staying curious about what's happening in the people space, and that helps me to keep our thinking sharp and future focused. And finally, again, as we've mentioned previously, understanding the business. So what we do, how we make money, where our challenges are. So you can't be that strategic people leader if you don't understand the commercial context you're operating in.
I think that commercial context is one of the biggest things that I see people struggling to wrap their head around as they want to progress within their HR career. Have you got any advice or tips as to how you do go about developing that when you're in an HR role, but you're not necessarily at a leadership level yet?
I'm very lucky that I've worked in professional services for a long time. So before the role that I'm currently in, I also worked at another professional services firm. So I've had a lot of experience in working in the arena, and over time you just get to I guess, speak the language, understand what's important to the business. But it's really important that you look outside of that and think about what is the service that or the product that you're providing. And one thing that was incredibly helpful in my previous role was that I was part of a project team. So it was actually really not anything to do with HR. I just put my hand up to work on a project that was looking at how do we best deliver value to our clients. And that really made me see things from the business perspective and understand what it is that they were doing for their clients and what the whole holistic package was that we offer to people, and understanding that and understanding all the different elements that all the different services, because we have so many. We're predominantly accountancy and audit firm, but we have so many other functions and services that we can offer to our clients. And it's just understanding exactly what those entail and how important they are, and putting yourself in the client's shoes, I think is incredibly important. And if you can then show that to the business, that you understand first and foremost, it's about delivering that service to the client in the best possible way, I think then you're onto a winner, really.
Gosh, it's just fascinating hearing you talk about that, Victoria, because when I started this whole series, I had no idea what everyone would say for their answers, what everyone would say that is different, what would come out that is the same. But this really strong theme is emerging from all the interviews about putting your hand up to get involved in stuff outside of HR's immediate remit. I hadn't necessarily expected that to come up. So it's just incredible hearing you talking about it, as well as having heard other guests on the show talking about it. My first instinct on hearing that, like thinking back to when I worked in HR and how busy it can be in that role, is like, how did you prioritize doing that and making sure that you have got that time to get involved in a project like that? What made you think, oh, I'm going to do this and I can fit it in around all of my HR duties as well?
Well, it was really difficult at first because it's a big piece of work to do outside of your, I guess, day job. But it soon became very apparent, actually, this is the day job. I can do my day job so much better. And it was almost like a light bulb moment for me where I was like, this is what it's all about. I think when you first start off in your career in HR, you're very siloed into thinking we're there just to do the people function without thinking about it is there for the business. It's not siloed. It doesn't sit in isolation. So yes, it was a short-term pain of when I'm trying to juggle it with other things that became absolute long-term gain. So absolutely worth putting your hand up to do those projects, definitely.
So for anyone listening or watching right now who's thinking, there is something at work I could be getting involved in, but I've been holding myself back because I'm so busy, just keep rewinding and playing that bit back of Victoria, and that's going to motivate you to keep on going, put your hat in the ring, get involved in the project, and know that it is going to lead to so many benefits in the long run. So thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm sure I'll say thank you about 100 times, Victoria, throughout this whole interview. Thank you for sharing that. My next question for you is, what is the biggest challenge you've experienced as a Chief People Officer? Now, I know you've only been a Chief People Officer for a short amount of time, so you may be about to say none at all, but I'll be really curious to hear what your answer is.
So I think probably this is reflective of the time, like what's happening in my career or in our business right now at this very moment. But for me, it's been about protecting and evolving the culture when the business is under pressure. So in moments of like change, so whether it's like tight commercial targets or acquisitions, or I guess any other wider uncertainty, there's a natural pull towards short-term delivery. And we're an acquisitive business, so we've gone through a huge amount of change over the last few years, growing very quickly, integrating new teams, constantly having to adapt. And in fast-moving environments like that, it's really easy for culture to slip down the agenda or sort of be seen as a nice to have. And I think that actually that's exactly when it matters the most. And we've recently actually revisited our values as a business and identified that our core value is understanding. And I think that's really powerful because it really calls on us to lead with empathy and to listen more deeply and make space for people even when things are moving really fast. I guess as a CPO, holding the line on culture but without becoming rigid is one of the hardest things to do, because you're having to constantly balance the business urgency with the human needs. And I think it takes courage to protect long-term cultural health when the short-term pressures are really loud. And you've got to know when to flex and then when you have to stand firm as well.
Would you be able to share some of the practical things that you've done to actually do that, to be able to make sure that the culture has been prioritised and that the organisation is able to hold fast to that value that you were talking about?
So that's been another project that I've been hugely involved with over the last 18, 24 months. And I guess it was knowing that we were going on a journey of merging with other businesses, and we wanted to really hone in on what is our culture and values within the business. We worked with lots of focus groups to understand who are we as a business, what do we want to be, where are we going, what's the aspirations. And we landed, as I say, on this one word, which was understanding, which we felt reflected who we were, but also where we definitely wanted to be moving forwards. And we've sort of unpicked that word understanding to, what does it look like in practice? What are the types of behaviours that we would want people to be doing or showing to show that value of understanding? So that's been helpful.
I think that's going to be so reassuring for lots of people to hear, because now that HR is often being renamed as people and culture, I think there can be this nervousness of, oh my gosh, as the people function or as the HR function, we're completely in charge of culture and it all rests on us. So hearing you talk about the fact that you were actually part of a working group, that it wasn't seen as your sole responsibility, I think will help people like breathe a sigh of relief around this. And
Yeah.
I think the thing that I'm now curious about is, how did you get everyone to realize this is really important? Oh my gosh, we're going through all this change. It's super fast paced. We're acquiring all these businesses, but we need to have a group of people who are committed to focusing on this and making sure that we have got the right culture for all of this to succeed. Like, how did you go about convincing everyone?
So before I get on to that, I just want to comment on the first point that you made, which was around there is this, I think, this view that we're responsible for people and culture within the people teams. I think we're guardians of the culture. We shouldn't be designing the culture of the business. The culture of the business is the culture of the business. You can steer it in certain directions. So that's a senior leadership role. Your senior leaders are who should be sort of driving that direction. As the people function, we're the guardians of it. So we make sure that if we've identified as a business, this is our culture, this is what we like about being here, this is what we sell to people when they're joining us, this is what we sell to our clients about who we are as a business. It's our responsibility within that to make sure that we uphold that and guard it carefully.
Yes, I completely agree. And for anyone who is thinking, oh, this is also interesting, I really want to throw myself into learning more about culture, there is an episode of the podcast from earlier, which was where I had two guests on the show actually talking about culture together. And watch all the way to the end of this episode, or listen all the way to the end, because I'll make sure that I let you know what the number is and what the title was. I have to look it up because now that we've had so many episodes, I just can't remember them all off the top of my head. But I promise at the end of the interview with Victoria, I won't forget. I'll check it and then I'll let you know. So now that you've reassured everybody that as far as culture is concerned, it is not the sole responsibility of HR or the people team, I'll move us along to our next question, which is, how do you maintain your mental well-being in such a high priority and demanding role?
Well, honestly, I'm not really sure that I always do. It is an incredibly demanding role. And on top of that, I'm also mum to a 5-year-old, and I help care for my dad, who's got some pretty complex health needs. So I think I'm in that sort of stage of life that many people find themselves in, where they're trying to be a great mum, great daughter, great professional all at the same time. And it is really hard. But I do try to set clear boundaries. I'm really lucky that I work in a business that's genuinely flexible. So as long as I'm delivering, I basically do have the freedom to shape my day. And that's meant that sometimes I've had to join meetings from the hospital while I'm sitting with dad, or I'm working the evenings after the bedtime routines. But I try really, really hard not to work at weekends whenever I can. I try and protect that time. And I've got to say at this point, shout out to my husband, because I do rely on him heavily, and it would be so challenging to do all of this without that support there as well. But I do think that there's like another layer to this within our profession, isn't there? Because we often carry a lot of emotional responsibility in the people function, because people come to us in their moments of crisis, like whether that's grief or illness or family breakdowns, and they often download all of those things to us that they wouldn't necessarily share with anybody else. And we hold all of that in the people team, don't we? And the truth is that can be really heavy, and we don't always have someone to download that onto ourselves. So I think peer support is really, really important. And we support one another really well within the people team where I work. But there is also some really kind and generous HR communities out there. And I found a lot of comfort in being able to connect with others who just get it. And as a professional, I think we're really, really good at supporting one another, and we need to make sure that we keep doing that.
Would you be happy to share what some of those communities are? Because I know there may be some people listening or watching who don't know about them and are feeling really lonely and would absolutely love the opportunity to join some of them.
Well, I mean, there's so many that you can join via LinkedIn. So I follow so many HR people, professionals on LinkedIn, and that opens up various communities that you can then join and etc. But I would say one of the biggest ones, and probably one of the most influential ones for me, is the HR Ninjas group. So you can follow them on LinkedIn, and they have a Facebook group, and they also have a CPO/director WhatsApp group. So we will exchanging views and challenges and ideas with one another on that as well. I would say if you're going to join one, that one is a good one to join.
I would totally agree. I've been in the HR Ninjas for years now. And although I'm not technically an HR practitioner anymore because I'm a coach for HR professionals, I always say that I just wish that community had existed when I was, because the support that you can get in that is absolutely fantastic. And I was really excited to see that Lizzie, who founded the HR Ninjas, has set up that CPO WhatsApp group as well. So I will make sure that I link to the details of the HR Ninjas and that WhatsApp group in the show notes. Or if you're watching the video version of this, I'll make sure that I pop it in the description below. So thank you for mentioning that, Victoria. We have mentioned the HR Ninjas a couple of times on the show before, but I don't think they've been mentioned in a while. So it's great to see them getting a shout out again. Now, you've already shared so much fantastic advice with us, but I'm confident you've got even more that you can give us. So my next question for you is, what advice do you have for anyone listening who would like to be a chief people officer one day?
Well, I'd say we've probably touched on quite a lot of it already. So it's absolutely be curious about the business, and not just the people side, but the commercial aspects as well. So understanding the P&L, the strategy, the risks, how the business makes money. As we said before, that's what really earns you that credibility and influence. And don't silo yourself. I think the best people leaders understand like tech, brand, finance, operations generally. They think like enterprise leaders, not just HR leaders. And you need to be able to connect the dots across the business and speak the same language as your peers. Definitely say yes to stretch opportunities and projects outside of the people arena, even when they feel intimidating, because as we all know, growth doesn't come from comfort, does it? It comes from like taking on the things that scare you a little bit. Surround yourself with a great team and be open with them and be human, get to really know them well. And remember that you don't have to have all of the answers, but you do need to create an environment where people feel safe and challenged and valued. And that starts with how you show up as a leader.
Oh, you're going to have to tell us more then about that, how you show up as a leader part. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that?
So with my team, I've got a team of around 40 people, but obviously I'm not the direct line manager for all of those people. I actually have 5 people who directly report into me, and we spend a lot of our one-to-ones talking about them as individuals and getting to know one another in that way, because I feel like that creates that psychologically safe environment where they feel that they can trust me and I can trust them, and they can ask whatever questions they want to ask of me without feeling like I'm judging them. Or I think as well, being really vulnerable and like admitting when you don't know something. That's so important. We can't all know everything. And I think you create a lot of credibility from a leadership perspective when you do demonstrate that vulnerability with your team.
And is that a vulnerability that you also feel confident showing when you're with the senior leadership team or when you're in those board level meetings as well?
Not so much. And I think that's something that we've really got to work on as a business. And I know we're not isolated in that. I think that's the case for a lot of people. But we do talk about this as a business, and we do recognise that showing vulnerability is an incredibly important thing for to be able to have those kind of relationships and conversations that you need to be able to have to drive things forward. And so some of the things that we've been doing to try and break down some of that is we do things like a video podcast. So we will have senior leaders talking about, and not just senior leaders, actually anybody in the business, but I think it's very powerful when it is senior leaders talking about some of their more personal challenges that they've had in life. So, we've had people talk about bereavement or divorce, health issues. So all of those sort of things that just opens up, people get to see them as a real human being. And I think that's incredibly helpful.
That's such a powerful thing to hear about. And when I asked you earlier about, how you are shaping the culture and making sure it's the one that what the organization wants to have, like, what an amazing example of really helping create an empowering, inclusive environment where people do feel that they can be vulnerable and that they can show those parts of themselves. So it's fantastic to have that example. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And it is funny how, even though there is all this research that shows, particularly if you read any of Brené Brown's work or watch any of her work, just the impact that vulnerability can have and how it really can be a good thing. But it can be hard. It can feel really difficult. We're conditioned to think that when we're in those senior level environments, we have to put on some sort of mask or charade or pretend that we've got everything together and we know all the answers. So it's just fabulous to hear that really practical example of how you can start to chip away at that belief and show that it is okay to be, and in fact, it's good to be vulnerable and authentic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think recognizing in the business that's something that needs to happen is a big thing. We know that we have a long way to go in this. And I think being a professional services firm, particularly, this is an area where historically we potentially haven't shown that vulnerable side of people, but we recognize it's something that needs to happen to break down barriers. And I think even just that recognition and starting to do things goes a long way to rectifying it.
Yeah, you're making me think. I had the loveliest piece of feedback about the podcast today. I was chatting to someone about this new series and I was telling them that I'd been quite nervous about doing it because it's a big change from all the other episodes to just completely hone in on this one core topic of the Chief People Officer role. And they said to me that they'd been listening to the new episodes, and what had really struck them was that all of the Chief People Officers are humans, they're regular people, and that actually that meant for them, it made them realize, oh, maybe I'm not so different to them. Maybe I could do that level of role. I could do that role one day if I wanted to. And it really made me think, oh, I'm so pleased that I am carrying on with this series and that I did do it, because that really is the message that I wanted to get across to people, because I just see so many brilliant HR professionals holding themselves back from going from the more senior level roles because they feel like, I'm not that right kind of person, or I haven't got everything together, or I don't have all the answers. So it's just fabulous hearing you talking about this and the vulnerability piece, and the fact that all of us, like anyone at any level within any organization, you haven't got it all together. Everyone has got stuff going on outside of work. We're not all these perfect beings. We're not robots, are we?
No, absolutely. Completely agree with you.
Anyway, I better stop getting so carried away with this particular part of the interview because we're going to completely run out of time. So let me move on to the next question, which is, what is the one piece of advice you would give to anyone who is about to start their first Chief People Officer role and is feeling nervous about it?
So I think really start by listening very intentionally and widely, and don't rush to prove yourself. Focus on building trust, like we spoke about before. Ask some good questions, really get under the skin of the business. And as I said before, remember it's okay not to have all of the answers. In fact, I've learned, I think, that one of the most powerful things you can say is, let me have a think about that, because I'm an introvert deep down and I cannot always think on my feet. I like to go off and reflect and ponder, and that's absolutely okay. And I think in our profession, we seem to have a lot of imposter syndrome. Why is that? I think maybe it's partly because we've got so many women, so many brilliant women in HR, and we know that imposter syndrome tends to show up more, I think, for women. But I think it's also because the scope of the function has expanded so rapidly. One minute we were like overseeing policies, payroll, and the next we're leading, as you were saying, Faye, on like culture, ESG, risk, AI. And so no one can be an expert in all of that straight away. We need to give ourselves permission to catch up with it all. And so I think if you're feeling nervous, it's not really a sign you're not ready. It's a sign that you care about it. And that's what's going to make you a really good CPO.
I actually have a whole playlist of HR Coffee Time podcast episodes about this, because I know you're absolutely right. It is something that shows up a lot for people within the profession. So again, I'll make sure that I link to that whole playlist. It's a collection of episodes that all focus on overcoming imposter syndrome and building up your confidence. So for anyone who just heard what Victoria said and thought, yes, that's me, I wish I was a bit more confident, I really hope they'll be useful. But now we are at our very final question. Oh gosh, I'm feeling sad. We're coming to the end of our time together today, Victoria. So my very last question is, are there any courses or qualifications you've taken that were particularly useful for succeeding as a Chief People Officer?
Not really, if I'm honest. I did do a master's in HR many moons ago, and of course that would have given me a really good solid foundation. But I think what's really helped me is just time, experience, coaching, and I think a lot of curiosity. So I've learned the most by reading widely, listening to others, being brave enough to put myself into situations that scared me a bit. So again, back to those sort of outside of the people remit projects that I've been involved in. I was really, really shy at school, and that still shows up sometimes, but I do try to push through that and use my voice. And I've had to sort of trust that I've earned my position, and you have to tell yourself that sometimes. So I think while qualifications can be really useful, of course, it is your mindset, your relationships, and your willingness, I think, to keep growing that really makes the difference there.
And you just mentioned about reading widely. Before I shifted the focus of the show to this new series, I used to ask every single guest for a book recommendation. And I wasn't going to do it with this series, but now you've just mentioned it, I feel like I would be passing up a brilliant opportunity to hear a fantastic recommendation. So have you got one book in particular that you think would be really useful for everyone listening to read? Or is there even maybe a couple that you'd like to share?
Gosh, I've got so many. Do you know what? I've got so many books, Faye, and I buy them and then I dip in and out of them and pick the chapters that I want to read. But I think, and people have probably said this before, I'm sure, but I think the one that just really made me step back and think was HR Disrupted by Lucy Adams. It just helped things to make sense and remind us that we're not there just to, from a compliance perspective or to police the organisation. We're there to, we need to remember that people are human beings first and foremost, and that was such a good stark reminder of that. Reading that book, it really did make me stop and think. And we now use the principles of that within our team, and we talk about it a lot within the team. And I try to remind people, we sort of use it as principles when we're making decisions or designing things, just to think about, have we thought about the individual at the centre of all of this? So yeah, so I would say if you've not read that, definitely one to get hold of.
Fantastic. Yes, you are not the first person to recommend that book. And actually, I was really lucky. I got to have Lucy's business partner, Karen, on the show in the really early days. She came on to talk about their each philosophy, which they talk about in the book. So I will make sure that I link to the book in the show notes or in the YouTube description. And I will also keep on listening to the very end, and I will let everyone know what that episode was actually called and what the number was. So all that leaves me to say to you, Victoria, is a huge thank you for your time today. It has just been amazing having you on the show. And I know that not only am I hugely grateful, but everyone listening or watching will just be immensely grateful to have heard and learned from all of your experience and your advice.
Thank you so much for having me, Faye. I'm really, really, really very grateful. Thank you.
Now that we're at the end of the episode, I just wanted to really quickly share the episodes of HR Coffee Time that I thought might be helpful for you to listen to next. So, of course, as well as all the other episodes that are in the Chief People Officer series, which, oh gosh, what number are we up to now? Is this the 5th or the 6th one? All you have to do is listen back to the most recent ones to listen to those. But as well as those, we have got episode 18, which is called Future Proofing Your Career with Karen Moran. Now, Karen is Lucy Adams' business partner, and it's Lucy Adams' book that Victoria mentioned on the show. And in that episode, Karen talks through one of the key principles, one of the key frameworks that makes up the book. So you might enjoy listening to that. I feel really lucky to have had her on the show, especially as it's when the podcast was really just starting out and wasn't well known at that point. Then another episode is episode 136, which is called How to Shape a Winning Workplace Culture When You Work in HR. And that was with guests Paula Brockwell and Annabelle Lawson. There's some great advice in there if culture falls within your remit and you just want to know a bit more about it and how you can be shaping it really effectively. And then finally, the other thing I wanted to mention is that I have got a playlist of episodes. So if you're not used to playlists, that really is just a term for collection of episodes. The playlist is called Build Your Confidence Playlist, and you can find it if you can track down the show notes, which you should be able to find if you tap on the episode. If you're listening to this in a podcast player, it should all come up for you. Or if you're watching the video version of this on YouTube, you'll see the link to the playlist in the description there for you. So thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. It's been fantastic to have you listening or watching today. I would love to know what your biggest takeaway was from the episode, or what it was that you enjoyed learning from Victoria the most. If you're watching on YouTube, you can just let me know in the comments, or if you're listening to the audio version, please do reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm there as myself, Faye Wallace, which is Faywallis. I always have to spell it out because I know that there are about a million other ways that you can spell my name. And I'm really looking forward to being back again with the next episode for you in 2 weeks' time, where I have another fantastic guest lined up for you.